There is a particular kind of silence that settles into a workshop at the end of the day. Not the silence of a room that has never known noise, but the silence of a place that remembers every sound it has ever held. The scrape of a handplane across dry timber, the soft knock of a mallet finding its mark. My wife used to say that a good workshop breathes, even when no one is in it. I never argued with her about that. She was right about most things. My name is Graham Whitfield. I am 68 years old. I run a small furniture restoration business out of a converted shed behind my house in the Adelaide Hills, about 40 minutes from the city. I have been doing this work for 31 years, first as a hobby, then as a living, then as the only thing that made sense when everything else stopped making sense. The shed is not large. It fits a workbench along one wall, a tool cabinet my father built in the 1970s, a dust collector that sounds like a tired dog. And, in the far corner behind the cabinet, a small writing desk that my wife Elaine made herself in the winter before she died. She was 61 when she passed. Pancreatic cancer. We had 11 months from diagnosis to the end, which sounds like enough time but is not. Our son, Owen, was 33 at the time. He drove down from Brisbane as soon as we told him, and he stayed for the last 6 weeks. He slept on the couch in the lounge and made tea he never drank and walked around the house at 2 in the morning when he could not sleep, which was every night. I heard him. I did not say anything because there was nothing to say. Elaine had spent the previous summer building that writing desk. She said she wanted something to do with her hands, while the treatment made her too tired for much else. She chose Victorian ash because she liked the way it moved in the light. She built it slowly. Over 4 months. In the hours when she felt well enough to stand. I would come in from the main workshop and find her there, fitting a drawer or planing an edge, and she would look up and smile in the particular way she had, the one that meant she was concentrating and happy at the same time. When she finished it, she lacquered it herself and placed it in the corner of the shed. She told me she was leaving it there for me. She told me it was mine to keep, not to sell, not to move, not to give away. She also left something inside it. In the slim center drawer, tucked beneath a sheet of felt she had glued to the base, was a folded piece of paper. She had written on it in her careful handwriting, which was always neater than mine. It was not addressed to Owen. It was not addressed to anyone. It was a note about the workshop itself, about the tools, about which pieces of stock were worth keeping and which could go. And at the very bottom, in a sentence that I have read perhaps 100 times since, she wrote, "If someone ever asks you about the value of this place before they ask about how you are keeping, be careful. People who want to know what things are worth before they know what they mean have confused the order of things." She wrote it 4 months before she died. She was not talking about anyone in particular. She was talking about life in general, in the way she often did in her final months, as though she was trying to leave me a set of instructions for getting on without her. I folded the note back under the felt and left it exactly where she had put it. I told myself I would show it to Owen one day, when the time felt right. That was 3 years ago. The time did not feel right until it was almost too late. Owen had met Renee at a work conference in Sydney, 14 months after Elaine passed. He called me on a Tuesday evening and told me she was someone he wanted me to meet. I could hear in his voice that this was serious, that he was not just telling me about a person but asking me for something without quite knowing how to ask. I said I would love to meet her. I meant it. Owen had spent the year after his mother died quieter than I had ever known him, and the idea that someone had reached him past that quiet was something I could only feel grateful for. They flew down together in April. Renee was 36, well presented, confident in a way that filled a room without quite asking permission. She was a project manager for a commercial development company in Brisbane. She shook my hand with both of hers and told me the hills were beautiful and asked thoughtful questions over dinner about the furniture restoration work. She seemed genuinely interested. I liked her well enough. They married 18 months later in a small ceremony in the Barossa. I stood in the row behind Owen while he made his vows. And I thought about Elaine. And I thought about how she would have cried at the good parts and pretended she was not. And I got through it by looking at my son's face, which was the happiest I had seen it in years. The first indication that something was shifting came about 8 months into the marriage. Owen and Renee had moved to a newer suburb on the northern edge of Brisbane, into a house that Renee had found and that they had bought together with a mortgage that Owen mentioned, once, was stretched further than he would have liked. He did not elaborate. I did not push. But I filed it away the way you do when you are a parent. In the part of your mind that keeps a quiet account of things that do not need to be said yet. Renee called me in September. She had never called me independently before. She said she was just checking in, which was kind of her, and then after a few minutes of general conversation, she asked me whether I had ever thought about what I would do with the workshop property when I was ready to step back. I told her I had not thought about it seriously. She said she understood, but that property values in the Adelaide Hills had moved significantly in the past few years, and that a good financial advisor could help me understand what options I might have. She used the word options in the way people use it when they mean decisions they have already made for you. I told her I would keep it in mind. I put the phone down and sat with the feeling for a while. It was not quite alarm. It was more like the feeling you get when a door you thought was closed turns out to be slightly ajar. The calls continued. Not every week, but often enough. She asked whether I had a self-managed super fund. She asked whether I had considered a granny flat arrangement on the property, which would allow me to access equity while retaining residence. She asked whether I had spoken to a solicitor about my estate planning. Each question was framed carefully, reasonably, as concern. Each one landed with the same slight pressure behind it, the pressure of someone who has decided where you should end up and is working methodically to get you there. Owen, to his credit, did not seem aware of it. When I called him and asked how he was getting on, he was warm and easy, the same son he had always been. He mentioned once that Renee thought it might be worth me looking at a sea change, maybe something smaller on the coast. He said it with the slightly careful tone of a man repeating something he had been asked to repeat. I changed the subject. He let me. The thing about patterns is that they are only visible when you have enough of them to compare. I began keeping a notebook, not because I was suspicious, not yet, but because Elaine had taught me that the best craftspeople keep records. Every conversation with Renee went into the notebook, dated, with the specific question she had asked. By February, I had 11 entries. Taken one at a time, each was reasonable. Taken together, they formed something that had a shape and a direction. I mentioned none of this to Owen. He loved his wife. More than that, he needed her, in the way people need the person who pulled them back into life after they thought they were done with it. I was not going to take that from him without being certain. Being certain would take more than a notebook. My workshop assistant is a young woman named Petra Nolan. She is 24, originally from country South Australia, and she came to me 3 years ago through a TAFE furniture-making course that I had given a guest lecture for. She is meticulous, curious, and possesses the rare quality of knowing when to talk and when to work quietly. I pay her 3 days a week. On the days she works, the shed sounds the way it used to when Elaine was alive, full of the small particular noises of someone absorbed in something they care about. Petra is also, I should say, the kind of person who notices things. She noticed, for instance, that when Renee visited in March, she spent an unusual amount of time in the workshop after the others had gone inside for dinner. I had taken Owen up to the house to help me open a bottle of wine that had a troublesome cork. We were inside for perhaps 12 minutes. When we came back out to call Renee in, she was standing near the main workbench looking at the tool cabinet in a way I can only describe as appraising. I did not say anything. I watched her eyes move to the corner where Elaine's writing desk sat. She looked at it for a moment and then looked back at me when she heard us on the steps, and she smiled and said the workshop was wonderful, so much character, and walked ahead of us into the house. The following morning, after Owen and Renee had left, Petra told me she had come back to the workshop after dinner to retrieve her phone charger and had found Renee inside, alone, with the drawer of Elaine's writing desk open. I sat with that for a long moment. Petra said she had not known what to say, so she had just asked if she could help with anything. And Renee had closed the drawer quickly and said she was just admiring the craftsmanship and had found her own way out. Petra had put her charger in her pocket and stood there in the quiet of the workshop for a minute before coming back to the house. "I didn't want to worry you," Petra said, "but I thought you should know." I thanked her. I meant that too. That afternoon I drove into Adelaide and made an appointment with a solicitor I had used years earlier. A steady, thorough man named Alan Corrigan, who had helped me and Elaine update our wills when Owen was born. I told Alan what had been happening. I laid it out in the same order I had written it in the notebook. He listened without interrupting, which is a quality I have always valued in a solicitor. When I finished, he looked at his notes and said that nothing Renee had done was illegal, that asking questions is not the same as acting on them, but that there were steps I could take to ensure my affairs were documented in a way that left no ambiguity about my intentions. We spent 2 hours on it. We updated my will. We drafted a document establishing the workshop and the associated property as a protected asset to be transferred directly to Owen under specified conditions that could not be redirected or assigned by a spouse. We also documented Elaine's writing desk separately, with a notation that it was to remain in the workshop and was not to be valued, sold, or included in any estate inventory. Alan asked whether I had told Owen any of this. I said not yet. He said that the decision was mine, but that in his experience, these situations tended to resolve better when the child understood what was at stake before a crisis made understanding harder. I drove home thinking about that. I pulled into the driveway at dusk. The shed light was on. Petra had left it burning, the way she sometimes did when she forgot, and it threw a warm rectangle of light across the back lawn. I sat in the car and looked at it for a while. I thought about Elaine building her desk in that light, working quietly through the winter afternoons while I was out the front of the house doing something else, saving something for me that I had not yet understood I would need. I went inside. I made myself a meal I did not particularly taste. I called Owen. He answered on the second ring, which he always does. I told him I needed to talk to him about something, and that I needed him to listen before he responded. He said, of course. I could hear him settle in his chair the way he does when he is giving his full attention, a habit he got from his mother. I told him about the notebook. I told him about Renee's visits to the workshop. I told him what Petra had seen. I told him about the 11 calls and what had been asked in each one. I did not tell him about the solicitor yet. I wanted to let the other things land first. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then he said, "How long has this been going on?" I told him. He was quiet again. I could hear him breathing. "She told me she was just worried about you," he said, "that you were isolated out there on your own, that you needed to think about your future." He paused. "She said it was because she cared." I said I was sure she did, in her way. I said that people can care about you and also care about other things at the same time, and that what matters is what they do with that caring. Owen said, "The desk." She had the drawer open. I said yes. He said, "Mum's desk." I said yes. What followed was not a short conversation. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Owen asked questions. I answered honestly. He circled back to some of them, and I answered those honestly too. By the time we were done, his voice had moved through several different registers, and at the end it settled into something quiet and very still, the way water settles when it is very deep. He said he would call me the following day. He did not call the following day. He called 4 days later. He told me he had spoken to Renee. He did not tell me exactly what was said, and I did not ask. He told me they were going to be working through some things, and that he wanted to come down to visit without her, if that was all right. I said of course it was. He came down the following Friday and stayed the weekend. On the Saturday morning, we went into the workshop together after breakfast. He had not been in the shed since the previous year. He stood for a moment, inside the door, the way people stand in places that hold memory, getting used to it again. He walked to the corner and stood in front of his mother's writing desk. He ran his hand across the top of it, the same gesture you make when you want to know a surface without looking at it. I opened the slim center drawer. I lifted the felt and took out the folded paper and handed it to him. He read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he looked at me and said nothing. But his face said everything that mattered. And I was glad we were in the workshop, because if we had been in the house, I would not have known where to put my hands. He put the note back. He sat down on the low stool next to the workbench, the one Elaine used to perch on when she came in to tell me dinner was ready, and then stayed to talk for another 20 minutes. He sat there for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "She knew, didn't she? Not about Renee specifically. She just knew there would be something." I said his mother had understood people in a way that most of us do not fully appreciate until afterward. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have been paying more attention." I told him that the people who are most trusted are often the least visible in what they are doing, and that the fact he had trusted his wife was not a flaw in his character. It was a feature of it. The problem was not his trust. The problem was what someone had done with it. He nodded. He looked at the tool cabinet and the workbench and the windows that let in the afternoon light, and he said, "I want to learn how to do what you do. Some of it anyway. If you'd still have me," I said there was room on the bench. He smiled, and it was his mother's smile. The one that meant he was concentrating and happy at the same time, and I turned back to the piece I'd been working on before he came in, and we worked alongside each other for the rest of the afternoon, without needing to say very much. In the weeks that followed, I found out from Alan Corrigan that the protections we had put in place were solid. The workshop property was documented. The will was updated. The writing desk had its notation. Nothing that I had built over 31 years could be redirected without Owen's full knowledge and consent, and Owen now had the full knowledge. The consent would never be needed, because the question would never be asked in the same way again. Owen and Renee separated in June. He told me over the phone, in a voice that was sad but also steady, the voice of a man who has made a decision and knows it was the right one even if it costs him. He moved back to Adelaide by August and found a flat in the city. On the weekends, he sometimes drives out to the hills and we work in the shed together. He has taken to restoration work the way people take to things they were always quietly suited for. Careful, patient, able to sit with a problem until it shows him where it wants to go. Elaine's writing desk still sits in the corner. The note is still in the drawer, under the felt, in her neat handwriting. I have thought about framing it, but I think she would have found that a bit much. She was not a woman who needed her words on the wall. She just needed them to be true. There is something I have thought about a great deal since all of this settled. Not with anger, which is not an emotion I find particularly useful, but with the steady attention you give to a lesson you want to keep. What Renee did was not dramatic. There were no forged documents, no direct confrontations, no ultimatums delivered across a kitchen table. What she did was slower and quieter than that. She asked questions. She positioned herself near the edges of information she had not been offered. She worked, patiently and methodically, toward a shape of the future that had not been discussed, because she had not yet found a way to make the discussion happen on her terms. It looked like concern. It dressed itself in the language of care. And that is precisely what made it difficult to see. The most important thing I learned from all of this is that love and transparency belong together. A person who loves you wants you to understand what they are doing and why. A person who is working around you will always have a reason why now is not quite the right time to be clear. If someone in your life makes you feel that asking a direct question would be unkind, it is worth sitting quietly with why that is. The second thing I learned is that it is never too late to put your affairs in order, and never too early either. If you have built something over the course of a life, whether it is a business or a property or a set of tools passed down from your father, it deserves the protection of clear documentation and honest conversation with the people you love. A solicitor is not an adversary to your family. A clearly written will is not a sign of mistrust. They are the same thing as a well-built joint in a piece of furniture. They hold things together so that what matters does not come apart under pressure. The third thing I learned is that children, even adult children, can be reached. They can be confused and divided, and pointed in directions that are not their own. But most of them, if you give them the truth plainly and without accusation, will find their way back to what they know is right. Owen did. He walked back through the door of the workshop and picked up a sanding block and got to work. That was enough for me. And the last thing, which Elaine already knew when she wrote it and I only understand now. The order of things matters. Before you ask what something is worth, learn what it means. Not just with property, not just with money, but with people, with time, with the quiet of a workshop at the end of the day, when the work is done and the light is going, and the whole of what you have built is simply there, holding its breath, waiting to see who will take care of it next. The shed light is on. Owen's car is in the driveway. There is a drawer pull on the workbench that needs refitting, and he said he wanted to try the technique himself this time. I have left the tools out for him. I have left the kettle on, and in the far corner, where the afternoon light reaches it just before it fades, Elaine's writing desk sits exactly where she put it, solid and still, as if it has never considered being anywhere else.